In the 4th year of marriage, Nolan's former canary came back with a child. He really liked the kid. He even said in public, "Having him is enough for me." People laughed at me for it. Later, I ended my 3-month pregnancy. He grabbed my neck, looking furious. "How dare you get rid of my child?" I pushed his hand away, smiling gently. "Isn't having him enough for you?" At a birthday party, Wendy burst in with the child. Ignoring the shocked guests, she rushed to Nolan with tears in her eyes, looking pitiful. "Nolan, please save Mike." Mike was the boy holding her hand, about 4 years old. He looked pale, gripping Wendy's hand tightly, nervously checking out the room. Nolan put down his glass, coldly observing them. "Why should I save him?" Wendy quickly replied, "He's your child." Everyone was stunned. Nobody could argue with that. After all, the kid, though young, looked uncannily like Nolan. But Nolan just sneered, glaring at her from above. "Just because you say so? You've been gone 5 years. Who knows if he's not some other guy's kid you're pinning on me?" Wendy's face turned pale and sharply interrupted him. "Nolan." Nolan laughed. "Am I wrong?" His eyes were full of mockery and disdain, as if he couldn't stand Wendy. But when I looked at him, I caught a flicker in his eyelashes and his clenched fist. He was saying harsh things, but inside he was struggling. Wendy looked at Nolan like she didn't know him. Because back then, he indulged her, like he'd give her the stars just for asking. Now he was cold and bitter. After a long pause, she laughed softly, tears in her eyes. "Nolan, I can tell you, you're the only man I've ever been with. Mike is your child. If it weren't for Mike's illness, and the fact I can't afford the hospital bills, I wouldn't have come back. If you don't want to acknowledge him, just say it. No need to insult me." Her eyes flicked to where Nolan and I were holding hands. Her gaze turned more sorrowful. "Forget it, you've got success, a happy marriage. I shouldn't have disturbed you. Sonny, I'm sorry." She apologized, but didn't look at me, just took the child and turned to leave. But suddenly the child began to cry, clinging to Nolan's leg. "I don't want to leave, I want Daddy." He looked up, eyes swollen from crying, pitifully at the tall man, called softly, "Daddy." My heart trembled. I quickly turned to look at Nolan. He had let go of my hand, looking at the child with a touch of tenderness that was hard to miss. Wendy picked up the child, coldly said, "He's not worthy of being your dad," and then left the hall without looking back. She came suddenly, and left just as quickly, but her vibrant figure stirred something in everyone's hearts. This drama started abruptly, and ended just as suddenly. The guests present were good at hiding their emotions. The party continued. A friend whispered to me, "Do you know that woman?" I glanced at Nolan not far away, smiled. "Yes. Wendy. She was the cherished canary Nolan cared for 3 years. Nolan was a playboy in his youth. Girlfriends came and went. None lasted more than 3 months, except Wendy. She was his only exception, his only preference. When Wendy entered showbiz, he took over the family entertainment business to protect and provide resources for her. He'd visit every set of her films, always there for her, personally presenting awards for her wins. In front of the camera, he'd look at her with such tenderness, love almost spilling from his eyes. But suddenly, Wendy announced her retirement, disappeared, and Nolan searched high and low for a year without a trace. Then a year later, he married me, who had just returned from abroad. Everyone thought I was too young, raised overseas, and knew nothing of the past. But I knew very well, because I liked Nolan, liked him since my youth for many years. Because of that love, I noticed their happiness, and upon learning they had broken up, rushed back to seize my last chance. Luckily, with a good background match, I married Nolan easily. Post-marriage life was simple yet happy. We grew familiar, would put down our work simultaneously on rainy days, snuggle on the couch in the dim room to watch a movie, discussing plots in whispers. I'd sometimes curiously ask for entertainment gossip. He'd glance at me and spill the details casually. He still didn't laugh much, but would hold me when I laughed. At that moment, our eyes met, breathing intertwined. I thought it was love. But now Wendy's sudden appearance shattered my dream. I looked at Nolan and asked softly, "Don't you want to chase after her?" He shook his head. I asked again, "Do you still love her?" Nolan hesitated, surprised I knew about Wendy's existence, or maybe shocked at my calmness, but still he shook his head. "I stopped loving her long ago." His words were firm, but his eyes wavered. I pressed my lips, suddenly realizing that knowing someone too well can hurt. Like now, I knew Nolan was lying. He wanted to chase her. And he did love her deeply. After that day, Nolan and I hit a rough patch. He stopped coming home every day. I saw him less than the paparazzi did. I once asked him. All I got in return was his indifference and dismissiveness. Until a friend secretly told me that Nolan had been spending a lot of time with Mike lately, taking him to amusement parks, dining together at fancy restaurants, and even throwing him a welcome home party. More extravagant than mine. Only 3 people attended though. Nolan, Wendy, and their child. I showed up uninvited, hid in the shadows to watch. Not far off, Nolan was holding Mike, watching him blow out candles, eyes full of tenderness, with Wendy standing beside him. Those 3 looked like a real family. I felt like the same person I was 5 years ago, a thief peeking at someone else's happiness, when clearly I am his wife. Suddenly there was a shout. Isn't that Nolan over there? And who's that kid with him? Isn't that Wendy? When did she come back? A reporter jumped out, loud enough to grab everyone's attention. Yeah, it's Wendy and Nolan. Isn't Nolan married? How does he have a kid with Wendy? Is this an affair? That kid looks at least 5 or 6 years old, and Nolan's been married for 4. Who's the third party here anyway? A crowd rushed towards them. Nolan's face turned cold as he held Mike protectively and dealt with the reporter's questions. When asked about the child's identity, Nolan hesitated for a moment, then said in a cold voice, "No comment." I watched him silently. I was suddenly curious about what he was hesitating on. Was he considering whether or not to reveal Mike's identity? Even if news broke, and I'd become a huge joke. Would Nolan care? Probably not. Just as I was thinking this, a reporter suddenly spotted me and shouted, "Isn't that Nolan's wife? Go ask her." A crowd turned towards me, cameras in hand, voices sharp and mean. "Sonny, did you know about Nolan and Wendy before? Whose child is that really?" In the crowd, someone pushed me, and I fell to the ground. My white dress got covered in mud. My knee hit a rock, and blood started to ooze out. The pain made my face go pale. Even the reporters were startled, quickly saying, "Stop pushing, stop crowding, Sonny just fell." The voice was loud, catching Nolan's attention nearby. He frowned as he looked at me, wanting to come over, but then a car window rolled down, revealing Mike's pale face, with Wendy saying something to him. Nolan gave me one last look, then got into the car, and left without looking back. My husband left me behind. I was actually helped by a group of strangers, some kind girls. They chased off the reporters, and carefully led me to a secluded spot. I meant to thank them, but one girl went pale, exclaiming, "Sonny, you're bleeding." I was taken aback and looked down, noticing the white dress was stained with blood at some point. Dripping on the ground. My abdomen ached fiercely. I suddenly remembered why I came today to find Nolan. I was pregnant. I planned to tell him. But now, it seemed unnecessary. When I woke up, I was in the hospital. I gently touched my belly and found the baby was still there. My mom was chatting happily with Nolan, who had a calm demeanor, his gaze fixed on me. Seeing I was awake, he tenderly tucked my bangs behind my ear. "Sonny, you're awake." His voice was a bit hoarse, like he hadn't rested well. I didn't want to say a word. My gaze was laced with scrutiny and coldness. Nolan's movements stalled. He forced a smile. "I didn't know you were pregnant, I'm sorry. But what difference does it make now that he knows? Would he not leave me again? If that's true, then he only cares about this child. Should I feel happy about this?" An intense bitterness surged inside me, wrapping me tightly. I turned my head away, not wanting to look at him. Nolan seemed taken aback, explained, "Mike has a congenital heart condition. He needs treatment. I'm his father. I have a responsibility to care for him. But don't worry. I won't let him disturb you. For now, you focus on resting in the hospital. He's a sweet kid. I really like him. So please don't harm him." I understood his unspoken words. I turned my head, a soft laugh escaping. "Nolan." He looked at me, his eyes so calm, catching a gentle gleam from the night outside. I lifted my lips into a faint smile, asking, "Do you remember when we first met?" He nodded, a hint of reminiscence in his eyes. "Yes, at the auction 5 years ago. You wanted to bid on the ruby necklace, but you were late and missed it. You felt guilty and cried at the entrance. And when I saw it, I sold you the ruby. 5 years ago. That ruby necklace was part of my grandma's dowry. I wanted to gift it back to her. But due to a flight delay, by the time I got to the auction, it was too late. Then I received the news of my grandma's passing. Grief overcame me. I cried at the auction entrance. So many people passed by. Only Nolan stopped. He asked me, "Miss, is there anything I can do to help you?" I looked up. Under the streetlight, his eyes were so bright, so gentle. A cool breeze blew by, stirring a young girl's heart. Ripples spread. And there was love. But that wasn't our first meeting. Yes. I couldn't hold back the smile any longer. Turning my head to hide the bitterness, I nodded gently, my voice light. I really liked you then. Really liked you. But Nolan, you forgot me. Forgot our promises too. Why are you crying? I was startled. Only then did I realize I was crying. Nolan gently wiped my tears away, looking at me with eyes full of deep affection. "Sonny, what's wrong? Can I help you?" Those familiar words echoed in my ears again. I suddenly looked up. The man in front of me was watching me with such tenderness and concern. But I seemed to see a younger face. He also looked at me with a smile and said, "Crying so hard? Can I help you?" Nolan got it wrong. We first met 15 years ago. He forgot me. But I never forgot him. At that time, I had just returned home for the new year, and was secretly crying in the garden, because I didn't perform well in a piano competition. And that's when I met Nolan, who was there to see my brother. From what my brother told me, I only knew he was impressive, and would someday inherit the company. It was my first time seeing such a handsome boy, and thinking of how I looked crying, my face turned red and I started crying even harder. He comforted me for a long time. I finally sniffled and said, "I didn't do well, and Mom said I'm stupid." Nolan chuckled and said, "Competitions are hard. I can't always do well in every test either." I was stunned for a moment. I never expected the genius my brother talked about would have exam worries too. Nolan pretended to be troubled and looked at me. "I'm 4 years older than you and still can't do it. Am I even stupider?" I shook my head quickly. "You're not stupid." He smiled and said, "Then you're not either." I nodded hard. Yeah, I knew he was just comforting me, but it made me feel a lot better. Soon my brother found us, put an arm around Nolan's shoulder, and left the garden. I watched his back as he walked away, and suddenly, mustering up some unknown courage, yelled, "I like you. Can I marry you in the future?" He stopped and turned back to glance at me. His eyes were captivating, with a hint of mischief but not offensive. The sound of spring cicadas couldn't drown out my heartbeat. He said, "Of course." Even though I knew he was just teasing me, I remembered it for many, many years. So when I really got to marry him, I was so happy I almost went crazy. The person I loved for so many years would be my husband, my partner for life. How wonderful. It felt like living a beautiful dream. But I forgot that beautiful dreams are fragile. They shatter at the slightest touch. I always thought I should be happy. But Nolan, why does happiness always feel like walking on thin ice? When Mom came in, Nolan had already left. She looked at me and cautiously asked, "Sonny, did you have a fight with Nolan?" "A fight?" It was more of a cold war. I shook my head. Mom sighed in relief and softly said, "That's good. Sonny, our family isn't as strong as it used to be. The business we have now relies on Nolan. You can't afford to fight with him. Don't throw any tantrums." Mom is supposed to be the closest one to me, but right now from her mouth, even if something went wrong between me and Nolan, I'd be the one at fault. I looked at her and suddenly let out a light laugh. "Mom, he has an illegitimate child. Should I just put up with it?" "Illegitimate child?" Mom's face darkened. "Is the news true?" She put the tablet in front of me. Right there on the homepage, trending now. Breaking. Nolan's illegitimate child exposed. Big news. Nolan and Wendy back together. Seen entering a villa intimately. The photos were crystal clear. They caught both expressions perfectly, and even noted the timestamps. The earliest one was the day after my birthday party, when Nolan didn't come home, but went to see Wendy. And the latest one was this morning, while I was in a coma. Before seeing me, Nolan had gone to a villa to see Mike. Nolan wasn't wrong, he really did like Mike. As I scrolled through the tabloid news, I felt unusually calm, almost amused. The angles of these photos were crafty, precise. The paparazzi wouldn't dare sneak into his home garden to take them. Only someone living in the villa could. Wendy could. She was the only one bold enough. Was she trying to make a statement to me? I looked at the tablet, at those glaring 4 words, and sighed softly. Back together. A broken mirror pieced back together. Could it ever be whole again? I didn't believe it. Wendy wanted in through the kid. Wanted to stir up public opinion, to force Nolan to kick me out and reconcile with him. She wished. Once the news broke, the internet was buzzing with activity. Nolan's PR team was quick, suppressing the news fast, minimizing the impact. Sunny also summoned me and Nolan to the old house. Her smile was gentle, but her eyes were sharp. Now that it's all come to this, Nolan, do you think it looks good? About that child. Your father suggested giving some money to send him off far away, so he doesn't become an eyesore. She spoke so casually, not giving Mike any thought. Even though he was her grandson, Nolan's face looked awful. I'm still his father. Sunny set her teacup down, the bottom making a crisp sound, interrupting Nolan. She sneered softly, saying, "What, you want him to acknowledge his roots? Make your worthless brother happy? Worthless brother? The only acknowledged illegitimate child by his father. So Nolan's brother. Nolan, there's only one company, but your father didn't only have one son." Sunny's last words were loaded with meaning, making Nolan freeze his expression. Seeing he realized the seriousness, Sunny's gaze fell on me, her smile warm. "Sunny, how about spending the night here? I'll arrange for someone to take care of you. It'll be better than the hospital." I nodded. Just before going upstairs, I turned to Nolan and said coldly, "Nolan, don't see that woman and child again. I'll handle everything. This is how you take responsibility for your wife, your marriage, and your future child." Nolan snapped his head towards me, his expression unclear. Lowering his head, he spoke in a low tone, "Mother, I understand." After leaving, it was just Nolan and me in the large living room. He didn't speak. Neither did I. In the silence, I found myself zoning out a bit. I don't know when it happened, but the times Nolan and I spent alone turned into endless silence. Cold and empty, the kind of silence that could drive you mad and shred your heart. Then I heard his voice in my ear. "Sunny, let's go watch the sunset." I was a little taken aback. Nolan had a hint of guilt in his eyes. "Sunny, since Mike came back, I've put too much of my focus on him, and forgot about the public rumors affecting you. I didn't consider your feelings. It's my fault. I'm sorry, Sunny. Can you give me a chance to make it up to you?" There was a touch of cautiousness in his voice. He sounded so sincere. I looked at him for a long time, and for a moment really believed his apology. Okay, this was my favorite city, because the sunsets were beautiful here. During the good times, I mentioned to Nolan about watching it together, but he was always busy and never got around to it. I understood him, but I didn't expect my return to this city would be when I no longer loved him as much. He seemed quite enthusiastic. He personally packed our bags. I sat in the living room, watching him move around, calling the doctor to ask about dietary restrictions, scribbling notes into his planner. "Doctor, I'll remember. Don't worry, my wife is my top priority. Careful and gentle like the perfect husband." For a moment, I was lost in thought, as if Wendy never came back, and everything between us still remained sweet and beautiful. When he hung up and saw me looking at him dazedly, a smile touched his eyes. He walked over and wrapped me in his arms. "Babe, kept you waiting? Let's go." I nodded. Just then the doorbell rang. I opened it. It was Wendy. She smiled at the corners of her mouth. "Nolan, I brought Mike to see you." But the next moment, her smile froze as she saw Nolan holding my hand. "You guys?" Coincidentally, a delivery of flowers arrived. The card read, "Wishing Nolan and Sunny a happy 5th wedding anniversary." The staff holding the flowers asked me where to place them. At this point, Wendy let out a cold laugh, her complexion pale and fragile. "So that's the day you got married." I was in the delivery room giving birth to Mike then. I didn't want a C-section. I wanted to remember the pain of childbirth, as if I could still hold on to you. It really hurt a lot, so much that I almost couldn't take it. As her words fell, Nolan's fist clenched tightly. It hurt me a bit, but I frowned without speaking. Wendy kept her eyes straight on Nolan, her eyes reddening. Tears began to fall drop by drop. Looking back, I was so foolish. I was in agonizing pain while you were getting married, and you'll have your own child. Why would you care about Mike? It's hopeless to hang on to someone who just won't stay. So whatever. Let it all go. A fragile beauty, pity-inducing. Nolan was just coldly watching her, and he remained silent. The loose fringe on his forehead obscured his eyes, making his emotions unreadable. Sorry for rambling. Sorry to disturb you both. I'll take your dad's money and leave here with Mike for good. Nolan, I really do love you. Raising her head, her beautiful face was streaked with tears, as fragile as a night blooming cereus. It was just a fleeting beauty, yet enough to stir one's heart. So don't expect my blessings. Mike, let's go. This time, Mike didn't cry or fuss. He just gave Nolan a disappointed look, his voice childlike, "Goodbye, Dad." The two turned and left, without any hesitation, as if they truly put it behind them. But this was different from what happened at the party. Nolan chased after them. He let go of my hand and grabbed another woman's hand. He said, "Don't go." But Wendy didn't look back. "Stay to be your mistress? Let my child be an illegitimate kid? Do you love me or not?" Nolan's answer was firm. "Yes, I love you and I love Mike too." The two embraced tightly, like any couple in love. As for me, I was his wife, but also his obstacle. As they turned for the last time, I could see the smug smile on Wendy's face. She should be smug. Everything I wanted, she got effortlessly. Having this child was enough for me. In front of the cameras, Nolan announced the child's legitimacy, naming Mike officially. When the news broke, many wondered if I would divorce him. Of course I wouldn't. Why should I make it convenient for Nolan? Why should I grant Wendy her wish? I am Nolan's wife. When I loved him, I didn't want to gain anything from him to prove my love was pure. But now that I don't want to love him anymore, I am the wife of the heir. With this identity, I could get the unexpected benefits. I just have the wife of an heir. Like gaining control over the family company. I sat on the living room sofa, and Nolan sat across from me. He tried to hold my hand, but I pulled away. He frowned slightly but still said, "Mike's health disqualifies him as an heir. Our child is the real heir." I interrupted him. Softly, "My family is holding a shareholder meeting tomorrow. I'd like you to represent the group and vote for me." His pupils constricted, showing a hint of shock. This was the first time I asked him for anything, let alone asking him to help me seize power from my brother. He looked at me hesitating. I sighed. My voice carried a hint of grievance. "Nolan, I know my brother is your friend, but the company has been declining under him. I can replace him. I have the capability to do so. You will help me, won't you?" I took his hand, my eyes filled with a hint of hope. This was the first time I'd gotten close to him since Wendy showed up. He froze for a moment, then agreed with me. "All right. How great." With Nolan's support, I naturally became the one in control of the company. Of course, some people opposed this. My brother, for instance. But with Nolan, a giant of a presence, backing me, what could he do? He was exiled, becoming a carefree playboy, which suited his intelligence. Otherwise, the company wouldn't have been in decline, leaving me without any say in my marriage with Nolan. But now, I'm taking back control myself. Nolan is willing to support me, ready to provide his connections, resources, even money, to let me fully grasp control of the company. I guess he feels guilty. Otherwise, he wouldn't be driving me to and from work every day. After that day, Wendy seemed to have vanished. Nolan and I went back to that early stage, close, infatuated. But I knew better than anyone else. There's no going back. We'd been sleeping in separate rooms for a while, and our interactions grew more silent by the day. Nolan would avoid me, answering call after call. After he'd hang up, his guilty, flustered look would tell me everything. Our marriage was now paper thin, just one sheet away from tearing apart. One night, my stomach cramped painfully, and as I went to get some medicine, I found Nolan coming out of the guest room, talking and hurriedly dressing. "It's nothing, I'll be right there," he said. Seeing me, he paused. "Sonny, why are you up?" "No reason," I replied, inching towards the living room. Nolan nodded. "Take care." I held my stomach and nodded. Nolan reached the door, but didn't leave right away. I turned back to see him staring at me, dazed. He asked, "Aren't you curious about where I'm going?" My stomach ached, and impatience crept into my tone. "Not really." Nolan gave me one last look, then forcefully shut the door behind him with a loud bang. It startled me. Nolan was angry. But what right did he have to be angry? On the other end of the call, I'd heard that soft voice clearly enough. It was Wendy. "Come keep me company, I'm a little scared." It was Ken. "Daddy, I miss you." Just 2 sentences. That was all it took to whisk my husband away. And Nolan had the gall to be upset because I didn't care? How dare he? How? Fiery anger surged within my chest. I trembled as I tried to fetch the meds from the drawer, but couldn't manage to get them out. I quietly watched the array of medications the doctor had prepared, red, green, white, purple, over a dozen types. I'm the one tormented by pregnancy migraines, by stomach cramps, by leg cramps so severe I can't stand. Why should I endure this misery? Why for Nolan? Why? Why? And then frustrated I shattered the table. Pills spilled across the floor. It felt liberating. After a moment of stillness, I picked up the phone and called a friend. "Yeah, set up a procedure for me. Discreetly, don't let anyone find out." The procedure was scheduled out of town. I told Nolan I had a business trip. Nolan was uneasy, wanting to come along. But I didn't need to say a word. Wendy easily convinced him to stay. Ken was going to have a heart transplant surgery. Naturally, he wanted to be by his beloved son's side. I had a dream about our wedding day. Beneath the crystal lights, I walked toward Nolan in my wedding dress. He held my hand and vowed in front of everyone. "You are my wife. I will protect you and take care of you, till death do us part." Protect me, take care of me, till death do us part. At that moment I really felt happy. But even while smiling and placing my hand in his, I descended into darkness. There was a little girl at the end. She smiled sweetly, wearing a pink princess dress, sitting on a swing, waving at me. I didn't know her, but I really liked her. I walked over, sat beside her, and listened as she chatted with me. She said, "I love pink the most, and I love princess dresses the most too. Aren't they pretty?" She twirled around for me, lively and adorable. "Very pretty." She beamed. "My mommy bought it for me." I paused, feeling a sudden pang in my heart. "Your mom must love you a lot." She nodded emphatically. "I'm a good girl, of course. Mommy super duper loves me." She talked to me about many things. Her innocent voice wrapped me up in the dark space. I didn't fear the darkness. I hoped she could stay with me just a little longer. But eventually she had to go. "It's time for me to leave," she said. I reluctantly let go of her hand. The girl walked away, but quickly dashed back into my arms, whispering, "Goodbye, Mommy." "Mommy?" I froze, suddenly realizing why she seemed so familiar. She looked so much like me. She was my child. I wanted to chase after her, but she had already turned away, running farther and farther. Even though I ran hard, I could never catch up. Intense pain crashed around in my chest, and I broke down, sobbing uncontrollably. And then everything went dark again. She left me with one last thing. "When you're happy, Mommy, I'll come find you." But happiness? It was gone. A week after the procedure, Nolan found me. His anger dissipated when he saw my pale face, boiling down to a single question. "Why did you get rid of our baby?" I glanced at him indifferently. Didn't want it. It was holding back my work. Nolan looked at me shocked as if I was a stranger. His voice hoarse, he spoke again. "But you always wanted us to have a child." "Yes. I used to want that so badly." With a bitter laugh, I fixed my eyes on Nolan and said word by word, "Didn't you say Ken was enough for you? Why should you care about me?" One sentence. That was all it took to drain the color from Nolan's face. He wanted to say something, but when he saw my calm, almost indifferent expression, he couldn't get a word out. As he was leaving, he didn't even dare to look back, and just softly asked me, "Don't you love me anymore?" I chuckled. It was a gentle sound, yet in the quiet hospital room, it was startling. "Of course I love you, Nolan," I replied, though my indifference was obvious. Nolan fled in haste. By the time I got home, it was 3 months later. I was recovering well, and had the energy to run the company. Nolan's mom threw a fit when she found out I had an abortion, but Nolan stopped her. I didn't know what he said, but she never brought it up again. That was enough. My brother left the company in a mess, bad debts, and poor partnerships. It took me a long time to sort everything out. When I finally got home, it was completely dark outside. For once, I got home earlier than usual. As soon as I stepped in, Nolan pulled me into the dining room. On the table was a steaming bowl of tomato and egg noodles. He looked at me, eager for praise. Try it, is it good? But I took one bite and put my chopsticks down. I called to the maid, Auntie, please make a fresh one. The maid was surprised, glanced at Nolan, then back at me. What about this one? Throw it out, I said. Nolan suddenly spoke up. I made it myself. I replied calmly, yeah, it's too salty. I tasted it. It's not salty at all, he insisted. I laughed, nonchalant. Then I just don't want it. I got up to leave, but Nolan grabbed my wrist firmly, his shoulders trembling slightly. Sonny, what's going on with you? I looked back at him, my smile deepening, trampling on true feelings. Taking a page from your book. Nolan's face turned pale, like a crumbling old building ready to collapse at any moment. No one cared. I didn't care. I used Nolan's connections to turn the company around. Now when people talk about the marriage alliance between our families, it's not dependency. It's a strong partnership. I'm the perfect wife, the best hostess of the company. At events, Nolan and I hold hands, looking like any loving couple. Facing the cameras, when journalists ask how we plan to spend the weekend, I'm about to speak when Nolan beats me to it. We're planning to watch the sunset. I was caught off guard as the reporters admired Nolan's romantic side. I laughed, not disagreeing. But away from the cameras, my smile disappeared. My eyes fixated on Nolan. He just smiled back. Sonny, we missed our last anniversary. Let's make up for it, shall we? You said that city's your favorite. His tender words stopped at the edge of my increasingly cold gaze. Why didn't you tell me earlier? Nolan's face fell. He wanted to touch me. I dodged. A silent standoff ensued. In the end, he looked down. I just wanted to surprise you. I sneered, we're adults. We have responsibilities. You know I have an important meeting scheduled for Saturday. Whatever you lose, I'll make it up to you. Stay with me, please. Sonny, it's been so long since we last went out together. There was a catch in his voice, sounding genuinely pitiful. But wasn't he the one who betrayed me, betrayed our marriage? What was he feeling wronged or sad about? I looked at him, unable to keep up even a hint of a smile, feeling utterly exhausted. Nolan, is this fun for you? Playing the devoted character? I've had enough. Wendy might enjoy it. You can go find her. His hand trembled violently, his posture stooped, his eyes downcast but unable to hide his dejection. I'm not pretending. Maybe my coldness awakened his rebelliousness, or maybe he actually felt guilty. But I didn't care anymore. I'll go on Saturday. Seeing the surprise in his eyes, I calmly added, but I'm bidding on that land. That risky piece of property was my first step towards taking the company to the next level. I couldn't afford any risk. I couldn't do it, but your company could, even if it meant paying a price. Nolan's eyes, once bright, were now dimmed again, but in the end he nodded, I'll help you. I showed my first genuine smile of the day. Looking at Nolan, I suddenly laughed. I finally understood something today. What? I laughed without answering him. What? Men are all the same. When you don't love them, they love you the most. The place where we watched the sunset had spring all year round, with breathtaking scenery. Walking along the mountain paths, the gentle breeze seemed to lift away some of my gloom. By the time we reached the top, the sunset was still early. Nolan stayed close talking, but I couldn't be bothered. He eventually fell silent. I was used to quietness. Nolan was not. That was his fault. The temple at the mountaintop was empty, home only to a single statue of Guanyin. The suspension bridge outside was covered in wind chimes, each inscribed with people's deepest wishes. The breeze set them ringing. Who knew if the goddess could hear them from above? Then Nolan asked, Sonny, if I've let someone down, will Guanyin help me win them back? He was asking the gods, asking me. I turned to him, noticing his teary eyes. He seemed so fragile, and my response was his lifeline. I turned away. My gaze settled on the statue of Guanyin, kind, compassionate, indifferent. I shook my head. I chuckled and said, no way. Would gods or Buddhas care about human feelings? So, Nolan, everything now is simply the result of your own actions. Don't regret it. I don't regret it either. Nolan looked up at me. His narrow eyes were slightly bloodshot, and his lips quivered as he called my name. Sonny, I truly regret it. He wanted to keep me, maybe even make amends. I blinked, but there was no trace of heartache left inside me. I was sure once again, I really didn't love him anymore. Once I admired you, followed you, and only wanted to be your wife. But you pushed me, step by step, into becoming someone without love or heart. And now that I'm Sonny, you want me as your wife again. But Nolan, how can everything in this world go as you wish? At this moment, the sun set, and the twilight fell on the face of the Guanine statue, mottled yet beautiful. The wind blew, and a jingling sound accompanied my words into Nolan's ears. I said, Nolan, let's divorce. Nolan didn't agree. I thought I was helping him handle the gossip from the outside world, solidifying his image as a devoted lover, turning Ken from an illegitimate child into youthful indiscretion. And he helped me secure my position as the head of the company. I thought we were even. I didn't need him anymore. So naturally, I didn't need to share my space with him. Then he went crazy. He lost it and smashed everything he could at home. I watched him. From beginning to end, I was indifferent and calm. But ironically, this made it all the more painful. He knew I was serious. He half kneeled on the ground, holding my hand. His emotions were intense, but he tried to calm his tone. Yet he couldn't control his trembling voice. I can help you, Sonny. Don't leave me. Whatever you want, land, properties, resources, I can give them to you. Stay, won't you? I'm begging you, I really love you. But I didn't love him anymore. I remained calm, unruffled. Nolan, a long time ago, I couldn't stand looking at you for even one more second. Nolan's face instantly turned pale, and tears finally fell from his reddened eyes, drop by drop, splashing onto the back of my hand. Warm. Dirty. I pulled my hand back, wiping it clean disdainfully on his shirt. I stood up, stepping on a shattered crystal glass. I remember buying it in our first year of marriage. Back then I cherished it. Now I kicked it aside nonchalantly, word by word, so don't degrade yourself. I really felt like throwing up. Finally, the divorce went smoothly, because I had evidence of Nolan's affair. Nolan didn't want it, so I said I'd sue. Nolan didn't dare to gamble, so I got more assets in the process. In a different light, in this marriage with Nolan, aside from sadness, I gained benefits I only dared to imagine before. I became the head of my family's company, an up-and-coming star in the business world. Where once I needed Nolan to get connections and opportunities, now I could get them on my own. I didn't need to rely on anyone anymore. Nolan and Wendy ruined my marriage, shattered my most beautiful dreams of love. But they gave me more tangible benefits in return. I ought to thank them. So, I sent Nolan a few photos. A little gift from me, acquired with much effort by a private investigator. Hope they both like it. The next I heard of Nolan was at work. You heard? Nolan stopped all of Ken's treatments. His mom took back the suburban villa and froze the secondary card Nolan gave to Wendy. Yeah, Wendy got kicked out of the villa, then kicked out of the hospital, 'cause she couldn't pay. No one would take her and her son in. So pitiful. What's pitiful about that? Wendy took the kid and crashed Nolan's dad's birthday party, calling everyone grandpa, grandma, dad, and mom. But guess what? The dad wasn't Nolan, but his half-brother. Turns out after Wendy split from Nolan, she got with that half-brother and got pregnant. The half-brother wanted to get back at Nolan by making him raise his kid, and Nolan actually bought it. Dumb, right? Good thing our boss divorced him. What bad luck otherwise. Yeah, our boss has the looks and the cash. Nolan's just a rotten cucumber, totally unworthy. What do you mean? How'd Nolan find out the kid wasn't his? I told him myself. I laughed, eyes crinkled, as I walked past the gossiping group incognito, kept my achievements and name under wraps. And what were the photos? A couple covered in mosaics. Nolan's so-called true love and his brother. Quite fitting, I'd say. I can't get enough of this drama. The end.